Thank you so much for taking the time. It's great to see you again. I am looking forward to this call because we had such great feedback from the last session where we did the Q&A from actual business owners in the areas where I've been speaking. Good to see you again.
Absolutely. And I'm really looking forward in the next couple of weeks of seeing you live as we make our way from one side of the Grand Canyon to the other.
Absolutely. I'm not going to lie. I have some trepidation about this endurance event that you've roped me into. But for those of the listeners and viewers that don't know, Jack is attempting his doing his fourth crossing of the Grand Canyon from the north to the south rim and back again. And I have been roped into it. And if ever there was a time where ignorance is bliss, this is it. Because I think if I know what I'm letting myself in for, I might not have been so eager to join the party. But as we get closer, now there's water shortages in the Grand Canyon, so we don't have water. It's 117 degrees apparently during the day. So I think if anything, it's going to be an adventure. Well, Jack, I'm going to dive right in. So today we have some questions from business owners, specifically from the Atlanta area. So these are members of a peer-to-peer CEO organization, and they've submitted a few questions that I'd like us to debate and discuss. So the first question is from a gentleman called David Hearn. And David actually has a challenge, which I think a lot of growing companies have. And that is as he says, he's somebody who's brand new to implementing a BDR team, an outbound sales team to his business. And what he's looking for is input on how to manage this outbound sales team. Specifically, what are the best metrics to hold a BDR team accountable to? What are your thoughts?
I'm going to give one word to start, and then I'll go a little bit deeper because he won't be satisfied with one word. Caution. Okay. And the reason I use caution is that he will hear an awful lot of people talking about that we need to be tracking the number of calls, the quality of calls, and lots of numeric metrics. And before you go in that direction, because it sounds so logical, you need to really understand what is the nature of the business, what's the nature of the product, what's the nature of the service. And then based upon how a good sales call goes and what is the definition of a good sales call, then you start to back in from that into what is it that we should be tracking. I'm going to give you a very real example. I was hired by a major bank in New York years ago to come in and help them with their conversion rate. And it was a giant call center. And when I did the analysis, I realized that the salespeople weren't spending enough time on the call. They weren't asking enough questions. They weren't really digging into whether there was a proper fit or not. And as a result, their closing rate was horrible. And so what I had to teach them is the person who asks the questions is in control, and it's not to be so responsive, to be the person who owns the call as the salesperson. But because of that, it would take a little bit longer. Well, one of the metrics that they were being measured on was how long were they spending on the call, and that they were getting recognition and rewarded for the least amount of time spent on the call. Well, the least amount of spent on the call is not equal to getting deals closed. So I said to by the way, this is 800 sales agents. Wow. I said, look, we're going to spend the time on the call and we're going to close more deals. We doubled conversion in 60 days. And I thought I'm getting called upstairs to the bosses for a bonus or a pat on the back, and they chewed me out because they had a lot of other people that wanted to talk to the salespeople that couldn't get through because they were tied up on the phone. Right. And so I said, well, look, here's the solution. Don't tell people to spend too little time on the call. Hire more people if you've got that kind of business going on, right? So again, the people were measuring the wrong things. Now, That being said, after giving you that caution and that story, then you need to figure out, are the number of dials that a salesperson is doing in a day, is there an appropriate number, and avoid the issue that I mentioned with this client. And then another metric is, of the dials, how many are they having as conversations? And then a third is, and this is for me most important, and what's the percentage of conversions?
Yeah.
So from my perspective, but again, I don't start with that. I end with that. I got to analyze what's a good quality call. So what you've had experience with call centers.
Sure.
What's yours?
I'm going to take a slightly different approach because I'd like to give David a kind of a balanced answer. What I love about your answer, Jack, is that it's simple to implement, right? What's the purpose of the call? What does a good call look like? Anybody can do that. When I read this question, for me, the red flag that came up, because this is something that I see a lot with people that ask this question, is if you're brand new to implementing and managing an outbound team, what that tells me is you don't yet know what a good call is. You don't yet know your numbers. So you don't know the number of dials. You don't know the number of outreach. You don't know the volume that you need and what your conversion rates are at the early stage of your sales process. And that's tricky. So if I was in David's shoes, there's a couple of things that I would want to do. And David, this really depends on whether you have the budget available. And as Jack would say, how big is your vision, right? If your vision is big, then let's go for it. If the vision is, I want to run a lifestyle business, trust me, there's no judgment here. Lifestyle businesses are incredible. It just depends on how big your vision is. So my short answer is this. Option one, you could contract in a third-party company, like Jack and I know Karen Cobb from the door opening company, and they could trailblaze for you. And the feedback that they would be able to give you after 3 to 6 months on what's working and what's not working could allow you to create the metrics on what is a good number of dials, what is the right messaging, who should you be reaching out to, how big should my list be, who are my high-value targets, what are their high-value needs, all that kind of good stuff. And you can reverse engineer your dashboard and KPIs from that. There's an investment attached to it, but the medium to long-term trial and error will be removed. Another option would be for you, David, to really think about what are your 1 to 3 year goals. So before you start thinking about what am I going to ask my outbound team to do, my question to you would be, what does good look like for you? What is the sales mix that you're trying to attract in order to hit your 1 to 3 year goals? How many small deals, medium deals, large deals? What is the lag? How long does it take for these deals to get from lead to prospect to quote to deal to invoice? What is the routes to market that you have? Are you going direct, through channel, through referral partners? How do you generate demand? Is it through inbound, outbound, networking, referrals, conferences? So what I'm saying, David, is I want you to think about what does your pipeline model look like that's going to help you achieve your 1 to 3 year revenue goals. And then once we have that, you can reverse engineer. Now that I know what good looks like for me, what am I now asking the individual BDR people to do in order to fill this pipeline? That's a slightly heavier lift, but I feel like the alternative is a lot of trial and error. That would be my 2 cents.
Hey, Morné, you just ignited something in my thinking when you mentioned to David, what's your vision from 1 to 3 years out? Because one of the companies that I had 2 partners with myself that we built, we went from 15 salespeople in a call center to 120 in 12 months. And the conversion rate was going down, not up. But the margins were so rich that we didn't want to delay fast growth because even though the salespeople weren't at the level that we could get them at if we grew slower, there was so much opportunity to grow fast that the conversion rate was acceptable to be lower. So, you know, you need to make these decisions vis-a-vis what kind of margin your product or service is driving, because the margin will dictate whether I go fast or slow and take that outsourced methodology or do it internally. And so, you know, for me, it's not just about selling, it's about profitably selling. It's all
Right.
about profits for me at the end of the day.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, and therefore, if we really wanted to pull the thread on this, you know, what is your average deal size? And, you know, how hard does it get to the decision maker, et cetera, et cetera? You know, all of these things will impact the strategy. But I think, David, you know, from what David, Jack, and I are saying, you know, your approach is figure out what a good call is and make sure that you know what it is that good looks like for the people that are doing the outbound. And then secondly, ask yourself, do I actually have the data to create a KPI dashboard? Do I actually have the data to know what good metrics are? Because otherwise you're guessing. And then we need to talk about how can you remove some of that trial and error. Okay. The second question comes from Marcus. And Marcus says, do you have any experience with personality assessments and specifically the difference between hunters, farmers, and leaders? And I thought maybe I'd kick this one off, Marcus, because this is something that's really in the wheelhouse of my company, Immerse. We use a tool from a company called the Objective Management Group that are based in Boston. And it's a fairly big topic. So I'm going to try and give you a good but succinct answer. Let me give you some examples of what are some of the things that we look for when we assess different types of sales roles. So if I'm assessing somebody as a hunter, then the criteria that they're going through is, will they prospect? Will they prospect consistently? Do they have a need for approval? And what that means is salespeople are taught that they need to be liked. And that's true. People buy from people they like. You've heard Jack and I say that. However, if somebody has such an overbearing need to be liked that they can't ask tough questions, they can't ask enough questions, they can't have the money conversation because they're afraid of pissing the client off, that is weak hunting. You have to position yourself for mutual respect, not just likability. You're there as an expert, as a consultant. So that's something that we look for. We want to make sure that the hunter can schedule meetings. I know it sounds like a really simple thing, but if you're not blocking time for the hard stuff, for the prospecting, for the cold calling, or whatever the outreach is, the statistics will show that people will gravitate towards what's comfortable. So the hard things, that eating the frog, has got to be scheduled. You have to be able to recover from rejection. You're going to get a lot of rejection if you're a hunter, right? Somewhere between a 2% and a 10% hit rate is normally where real door openers are. So you're going to have to be able to bounce back pretty quick. You're going to have to be able to maintain a full pipeline. If you have perfectionist tendencies, we have to make sure that those perfectionist tendencies don't stop you from prospecting. Oh, well, if I can't do it perfectly, I'm not going to do it at all. That's not what hunting is about. Sometimes in hunting, done is better than perfect. You've got to be able to build rapport quickly, whether it's on a phone call, a Zoom call, or in person. You've got to be able to reach your target prospect. You need to be able to get referrals, use social tools, and leverage networking. Now, I know that's a mouthful, and I'm sure this video, my team will run it through some kind of a software that you'll have narration and you can take notes. But if you want me to send you that list, Marcus, I'll email it to you separately. But this is just a snapshot of the stuff that we look for in hunters. And as you can see, it's a pretty substantive list. Now, let me talk to you about account management. How is an account manager different from a hunter? Well, they have to have strong relationships. They have to be able to handle organizational politics, right? If you're account managing or farming an existing account of any kind of substantive size, there's multiple people involved in the buying process, and their own personal agenda is sometimes in conflict. And you have to navigate that if you're going to farm that account effectively. You're going to have to be able to develop champions within that organization, people that are championing you and your cause. You have to have a touch system. Jack and I will talk to you all day about touch systems and follow-ups. You have to be able to have access to decision makers. You have to know real budgets, not the one they tell you, the person who has the purse strings, the person who makes the decision unilaterally. What do they say they have to spend? You can't have an overbearing urgency to close business. What does that mean? It means that you've got to care more about the customer than you care about the transaction. You know, an account manager is in it for the long haul. You're in it for customer lifetime value, not for the next transaction. You have to focus on your current accounts, rather than being distracted with shiny things on the outside. And finally, you have to be able to manage your time effectively, because account management can be incredibly time consuming. And then in the leader thing, I'm not going to go into that in any great detail because that's a very big topic. But what I'll tell you is this: starting with sales managers, forgetting about sales leaders for the moment. If I'm looking at a sales manager, there's a whole bunch of stuff that I want, but I'm going to tell you the 5 top things that I look for in a sales manager. Number 1, their ability to coach others. Number 2, ability to hold others accountable. Number 3, motivation. Number 4, recruit the team. Number 5, pipeline management of a team. Because Jack will tell you the HPAs for a sales manager grow the team in quantity and quality, not the number. So already just on that wasn't such a short answer in the end. You can see there is a vast difference between hunters, account managers, and sales managers. So I beg of you not to make one of the 3 mistakes, one of the 3 sins of sales management, and hire one person to do all of that. These are very different roles that should be done by experts in their field. Jack, any thoughts on that?
Bravo, standing ovation, great content. And I will say that Marcus is loaded up with all kinds of stuff by
Sure.
virtue of your gift in answering that question. Now, I'm going to add something, and it's just going to be really short. And it's going to come off as if I'm not a fan of personality assessments, and that would be wrong. Okay. But here's the deal. There are many ways of interviewing and assessing whether a person's going to be a successful hunter or farmer, and whether they're going to be a successful sales manager, so to speak, right? The personality assessments are one tool only.
Absolutely.
And the reason that I'm making this caution is I see too many people make their decisions almost solely based upon these assessment tools. And from my perspective, I would tell you that I've gone to the opposite extreme and say, I use these tools more to tell me who's not a candidate to start the second tier of interviewing. Sweep all of the non-players off, use the assessment tool for that, and the people that are left, now I start to go deeper in terms of the interview process. And as you know, I've got, systems and processes for damn near everything. And so a minimum of 3 interviews of the candidate by the person to whom they're going to report, and 3 additional people ought to be interviewing that person. And might be the CEO of the company, could be an HR person, could be the head of operations. And so I'm getting feedback throughout the organization as to whether this person is a good fit. But all of that I would start to do after I've cleaned up the pool by virtue of the assessment. And again, what I find is the opposite. Hey, who came out highest score on the assessment? Let's give that guy an offer. And that's just a fail for me. As far as specific tools, I've not taken one that I haven't loved. I think they're all great, fascinating pieces. I just want people to understand that the hiring process is beyond the tool.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. And I think that's a good bookend for that remark. Assessment tools, whatever you use, and there's a lot of good ones out there, Marcus. I look at them as a road sign. They're pointing you in a direction and saying, pay attention over here. But as Jack says, and we often talk about this when we talk about recruiting, if I had my choice, I would hire for attitude, not for skill, because I can teach you how to sell, but I need you to have the right mindset and the right beliefs, the grit, as we call it, right? And somebody gave me a definition of grit the other day, which I really loved. And he said, it's when passion and persistence meets. And what I love about that is that if you can find somebody with the right mindset and high core value alignment, we can teach them skill. So what I would encourage you to do is use the assessments to figure out if somebody has the right mindset and grit to be a hunter, the mindset and grit to be an account manager, the mindset and grit to be a leader in your sales team, and then figure out the skills after that in a different way. Absolutely. Great. Thank you for that, Jack. So our third question is from Aaron. Aaron has a similar question to what David had, but it's actually an interesting nuance on this. And this is one that we also get a lot, especially with where companies have, what we would call C players, right? And Aaron says, my question is how to properly track high achieving salespeople who are resistant to KPI measures like calls per week, quotes per month, follow-up percentage, etc. Because in his experience, tracking these KPIs, it can be demotivating, particularly for hunters. What do you think, Jack?
This particular question haunts me.
Right.
And I'm a blunt guy, and I'm speaking direct, right at you. And that is, I'm questioning what the kind of culture you have in your company. What is the culture such that high achievers would be resistant to tools that could enable them to be even more successful? Whatever we're doing in terms of measurement and tracking and KPIs, they should be in the best interest of increasing the sales. And if our salespeople are compensated based upon higher performance, then bring it on. Now, I think the nature of the question that was brought to you is that we're probably hearing from the high achievers, I'm having to spend too much time doing things that are not sales oriented in order for you to track and measure my activities or whatever we're measuring. And so I would complain about that too. I would be one of those high achievers. If you've got me doing a bunch of stuff sitting in front of a computer screen when I could be out in front of a high prospect that I could be closing, I have zero tolerance. I was going to say a low tolerance. I have zero tolerance. And as a salesperson, top performer, have been in trouble with many companies over the years because I refuse to do it. And if you don't like then fire me, or I'll quit. I'll go somewhere else, but I'm not going to sit here and do that type of work. Well, that's not the answer. It's not that I'm resistant to you doing that. It's just I don't want to do the clerical aspects of it. So, if you don't have an assistant, you are one. So are we supplying assistance to our high achievers in order for this data to become available for tracking and measuring? Because wherever I've gone, high achievers want to be measured. They want the numbers. They want to stand up in front of people and say, look at my numbers up there on the board. I do a lot of sports analogies when it comes to sales. Sports teams are run better than most businesses, right? To think about anybody good in any sport that you pick, and do they want their stats up on the visible? Absolutely. Do they want their activities visible amongst all the rest of the team? So here's one of the things I would tell you. Buy the book Relentless by Tim Grover and have all of your salespeople in the company read that book, because Tim Grover worked with the top sports people, whether it's Michael Jordan or Kobe Bryant or Tiger Woods, and it takes you through the fact that these guys were all about measurement and broadcasting results. So I just think the culture needs to be relooked in Aaron's company. That's where I came out.
Yeah, I like that. I mean, I tend to agree with where you started with that, Jack, which is the culture piece. That was my first kind of question mark in my mind. Aaron, I get that this is a real thing. We come across companies all the time that have high-performing sales teams, and when you say to them, you need to make this many calls a week, you need to do this many quotes a month, you often get pushback because the view is, I'm smashing my quota. Why do I need to be telling you how many calls I make? If I make fewer calls and I still hit my number, why is that a bad thing? So there's a question for me around the culture. There's a question for me about what it is in your playbook. It's a question for me about which metrics are you tracking and why? Are we actually tracking metrics that matter? And then the other thing that I would say to you is what we've done with some of our clients who have got high-performing sales teams is we make the sales team part of the setting up of KPI dashboards so that they own it, right? So instead of saying to them, I think we should be tracking, what I'd rather do is sit them down and say, right, you guys are the A team, you're SEAL Team 6, you're smashing it. let's look at what are the leading indicators of success, but the things that make sense to you to track, where you can hold each other peer-to-peer accountable. Because if you look at Kobe and Jordan and these guys, what they loved was almost like showing off to their friends as to some of the leading indicators of success. So how can we get some of that competitive spirit into the way that you manage this team, as opposed to dictating to them measures which they might not perceive as valuable? And what we've created for our clients is a system that we call UNPACC. And what we do with UNPACC every week, it's simple. It's 8 minutes per salesperson. And we put the onus on the salesperson to report back, as opposed to a sales manager going, what have you done? What have you done? What have you done? Which is something that high achievers hate, right? They hate to be chased. So UNPACC is very simple. Firstly, the U is update on actions from last week. I committed to doing these 3 things last week. It's either done or not done. I don't want war and peace. I don't want in progress. I don't want excuses. Was it done or was it not done? The end. The N is numbers. Present back to me your dashboard. So the dashboard that we created together, where are you against your numbers? 3, the P, pipeline. What are your highest priority deals that you're going to sign next? And where are you overall in your month, your quarter, and year to date? A is actions. What are the actions that I'm going to take in the next week to address anything that's in my pipeline? And the C is calendar. And this is really the interesting one. If you're doing it remotely, you share your screen and you show your calendar. And I want to see that you've blocked out the time to take the actions that you say you're going to take. You do that for me in 8 minutes and we're good. And when we've run that system with high performers, they feel like they own it. They have to come prepared. It's more peer-to-peer accountability than it is somebody cracking a whip over their heads. And that's managed to get us much better results with high-performing teams. So that would be my suggestion.
Man, that was awesome. And let me just go back in closing to that high achiever resistance. When Shaquille O'Neal got traded over to the Lakers, there was tension, to say the least, between Kobe Bryant and Shaq. And the tension was because Kobe was aspiring to get better every day and measured himself on all these different metrics. And Shaq was resistant, saying, hey, I'm already one of the best. I don't need to be there, right? So what is your, Aaron, who are your high achievers? Are they Shaq or are they Kobe? Because I want a team of Kobe's. And again, Shaq set a lot of records and played for a lot of winners. But at the end of the day, if I have a sales team, I want guys that are aspiring to get better all the time.
And maybe one final thought on that, Aaron, and this is just something for you to keep in mind. If you have high performers in your team, but they don't want to play ball, they don't want to follow the playbook, the scalability of your team is going to be very hampered by that. You know, the metaphor that I use is, if you have a room full of people and they all have the flu and you bring in someone healthy, the healthy person gets sick, not the other way around. So if you now go out and hire salespeople who are very coachable, prepared to follow the playbook, enthusiastic, energetic, and you put them into a room with quote unquote high performers, so people that are hitting quota, but that have big egos, and I have my own style and I don't have to follow the playbook, your business is not going to scale past that point, because you're now being held ransom by high competence, low core value aligned salespeople. So there's going to be a glass ceiling in the growth of your business, unfortunately. Okay. The next one, and I think that'll probably be this for the last one for this session, Jack, is from Daniel McMorrow. Now, Daniel has an interesting one. So Daniel talks about incentives for the sales team. So I imagine he means compensation by that. And what he says is, he's curious as to how do you incentivize sales teams where you expect the salespeople to collaborate? So especially where it looks like they have customers that find them online. So these are inbound opportunities. And it sounds like he has multiple different people in his team touching this opportunity. So how do we incentivize people to collaborate? You know, almost like if you think about a restaurant where instead of the waiter getting their own tips, they pool their tips and then it gets distributed to everyone at the end of the night, right? How do you run a sales team where you expect them to collaborate? And he had previously gotten some advice that maybe you should think about rewarding activities and not just the commission dollar value. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I went and just said, you know what, I'm going to leave all that compensation alone,
Mhm.
because if we dive in the compensation of
Big
salespeople,
topic.
that's beyond the question. So I went a different approach and said, what could I do additive to the way the question was phrased?
Okay.
And I came up with contest, team contest. And I like a mix of different contests. And what I would recommend to Daniel is that if you go to my website at jackdalysales.com, I have 4 magazines that are 32 pages apiece, called Get Jacked, and you can download those for free. And one of them has an entire article on sales contests. And we've used these contests very, very effectively with sales organizations. So I'll just describe 2 very quickly, and then I'll just pass it back to you, Morné.
Sure.
One is, I called it the steak and beans contest. And we just put 11 teams of our sales people together. They were individually competing and being compensated individually, but we put them on teams, and the winning team at the end of 60 days, we'd take to a fine restaurant with steak and lobster and beautiful cutlery and everything else. And they'd sit on one side of a long table. And the bottom team, team 11, would sit on the other side of the table, and instead of a tablecloth, it would newspapers and paper plates and plastic forks, and the chef with his toque would come out and dollop a bunch of beans on their plate while the other guys across the way. And then at the end, when they came back in the office, we had banners over the 2 teams, the dream team and the bean team. And I don't know that teams fought to be the dream team, but they fought like hell to not be the bean team. And it just brought levity, and it brought camaraderie, and it got together in terms of working together as a team. And the investment, or the cost, I call them investments, was very negligible compared to the results that we produced. Another one is that I had 20 offices around the nation, and I wanted them to be all cooperating within each of the offices. So, but we had people that were operating as almost independent folks in each office. So in order to get that together, we set an agreed upon target as to what their target would be for the month and for the year. And then any month that a team, an office, achieved 130% of the budget for that month,
Mhm.
we took everybody in that office to Vegas for 3-day weekend, all
Wow.
expenses paid. And then we had a lottery where we drew the name. Everybody that worked in that office, their name was in the hat. And we drew 5 people's names out. And the first 4 drawn out was worth $500 a piece. And if you pulled your name out, but you didn't want to forego the opportunity to win the grand prize, which was $25,000. And so we had salespeople that just said, I want to stay in for the 25 and throw the $500 back in. And we had other people that were clerical that said, you know what, $500, bird in the hand, I'll take that.
Yeah.
And quite frankly, on one of the Vegas trips, the person who won the 25 grand was our director of first impressions, what a lot of companies would call the receptionist. And I still remember her name. Her name was Sarah, and 25 grand was somewhat life-changing. And
Absolutely.
but these 20 offices were all now participating within the office and working as a family and as a team. So
Mm.
again, there's more stories about more examples of contests, but I think the contests really are an enhancement to the culture.
I love that. I don't know that I have any stories that can top that. The dream team and the bean team. I'm sure that there is, the audience is probably split. There's people that are thinking that's great. And then there's people in the audience going, that's horrible. What, those poor people in the bean team. Fair enough. We're not telling you to do any of these things or giving you examples, but of course it's going to be down to, the kind of sales culture that you have. What kind of sales culture are you creating? Is it a more traditional sales culture? Is it something that's a little bit, more consultative? There's no good or bad. There's whatever works for your business. And I just love the different examples, Jack. I was going to say something similar. I was going to say, in my experience of what we've done for clients is if you want to create a sense of togetherness, then people have got to be in it together. Now, again, if you have people in your team that are not carrying their weight, that's going to cause friction. But that probably tells you something about the people that you have in those seats, right? What you want is to be able to, I feel, give individuals some instant gratification. So recognize them for the role that they've played in the sales process, and then have a team incentive so that people are working together and they're saying, let's all do our part, because as you said, there's a contest, there's a trip, there's a something down the road that we can get. So you get a little bit of instant coffee by having a small incentive for doing a good job yourself, but really the big prize is the team prize. That's the way that I would approach it. I love that. Jack, maybe
I have to throw this in after those comments. That particular company that had both of those types of contests that I mentioned and some others ended up being Inc. number 10 on the Inc. 500 with 10,100% growth, and Entrepreneur of the Year from Ernst & Young. Now, if those are not aspirational in your culture, and if that's not something you want as a business owner, I respect that. But if you're interested in really giving a real high charge, then I think that you have a mix of things that are going on in the company. And and again, it's all done in good spirit, good fun.
Absolutely. No, it's I can see how it will definitely bring levity for the right team, for sure. Jack, if you're up for it, maybe we can take a couple more minutes and do one bonus question. I noticed Bill Wood on here, and Bill is actually somebody that I know from Atlanta, and Bill put an interesting question forward. So we'll do one bonus question if you're up for it, and then we'll wrap up this session. So Bill says he's looking for motivators to challenge smart and engaged individuals so that they can elevate themselves from a more tactical, inefficient, and comfortable sales process to where they focus on high payoff activities. Now, I'm going to provide a little bit of context because I happened to have a follow-up conversation with Bill after he submitted this question. So there's a little bit of context around this. What Bill means with tactical, inefficient, comfortable sales process is that Bill's created a very strong inside sales team. So he's got a sales team who are really good at closing, account management, farming. And what he's now looking for is, how do I get these guys to focus on what he thinks are high payoff activities, which in his mind is, how do I get them to be a little bit more proactive, a little bit more outbound? So I think I'll kick this off by saying this, because I think this is a good learning for anybody on this call who has a strong inside sales team, and you're thinking, man, I wish they could just do a little bit of outbound. I, in fact, had a call with a company yesterday, the exact same challenge. So first and foremost, I have to give you some bad news. Sometimes your inside sales team will never be good at outbound sales. Sometimes you've built an incredibly good team of people that are account managers. And as we said earlier, one of the earlier questions, I think it was Aaron, we said, well, a hunter and a farmer, an account manager, these are not the same people. You know, Jack, I think you famously said a sumo wrestler and a tennis player can both be world-class athletes, but you don't see a lot of sumo wrestlers running around Wimbledon. So you need to have the right person in the right seat to do that job. Now, if your people are incredibly good at account management and farming, they may never be good at outbound. So the first thing that I would do is, Bill, I would evaluate this team. I would evaluate them for those core competencies and see whether there's anybody in this team that has the competencies, the proclivity, the mindset, the beliefs to actually do some outbound. What we don't want to do is evaluate people the wrong way. I don't want to evaluate a fish by its ability to climb a tree. So I want to know if I've got people in that team that are capable of doing outbound, and then I can nurture that if that is in fact the right thing to do. The other thing that I want to know is, if you're talking about motivators, well, what is it that motivates your team? Have you really uncovered that? Because while salespeople are motivated by money, extrinsically motivated, what we now find when we evaluate, especially younger sales teams, millennials, Gen Z, we're finding that they're also intrinsically and altruistically motivated. So they're looking for significance, connection, belonging to a tribe. They want to do good for the world, good for the community. What are all the different motivators that you have in your team? And when you think about the way that you're motivating your people. We almost touched on compensation in a previous question, but Jack will tell you, when we design compensation systems, once we've taken care of like the Maslow hierarchy of needs, the bottom of the pyramid, and we get all the way to the top, then we're looking for non-financial ways to recognize and reward. So do you actually know what motivates your team? Have you done that homework? Because we need to design motivators for you that are both financial and non-financial. That's only after we've established whether your existing team can be converted into focusing on high payoff outbound activities. Because if not, Bill, you may have to do the long play here and hire some people that are specialists in hunting, door opening new business. And then the final thing that I want to say that you should look at once you've evaluated, you've looked at your motivators, is let's look at your sales process. Let's look at optimizing your sales process, and let's look at what are the high payoff activities in every stage of your sales process. I bet you that you have a pretty good grasp of HPAs when it comes to things like quoting, presenting, closing, follow-up. But maybe what we need to be looking at is, what are the high payoff activities for lead generation, prospecting, and discovery? And once we know what that is, then we can say, do I actually have the people to do it? Or do I need to use recruitment as an upgrade tool and go and find the people to do it? That would be my start on that. What do you think, Jack?
Well, yesterday you sent me a list of the questions that we might tackle today.
Yeah.
And I made a couple notes on each one. And on this one, I didn't have much to write down.
Okay.
I just wrote HUH with a question mark. Like
HUH, okay.
Huh? Like what? What? Look, I'm way more blunt than you are.
Sure.
And so let me try this a couple different ways. If any of the listener viewers know me in any way, and I were to ask you, so where do you think you would put me as a salesperson? Do you think that you would put me in the farmer or the hunter seat? Would you have me as the outside sales team or with the inside sales team? Well, in my audiences over 30 years, if I posed that question to them, the place would be outrageously, uproaringly laughing. And because I would be in the hunter category for sure. Now, that company that we talked about earlier in one of the questions that I said was an Inc. number 10 company, well, we had 120 salespeople in a call center inside sales environment, but we also had 20 some offices around the nation with outbound salespeople. And I had my top performers in each. But if I tried to switch their roles, we would have had a failure as a company. Right. It didn't matter what their work ethic and the attitude, like it's just not a good fit for either one of them. So if you got a kick butt inbound inside sales team that's operating on all cylinders, man, God bless, thank the Lord, and don't screw it up. Don't try to change them. Go hire yourself the right people to do outbound, because those people love being in that role. So for me, I'm not going to try to answer the question on how do I motivate these characters to change their behavior. I want to hire people that are already motivated to be outbound, right, to be hunters. That's the answer. I'm not going to try to fix what isn't broken. What you've got is great. Leave it be and focus on that outbound.
In fact, I remember, excuse me, I remember when you and I ran the workshops last week. I think it was the sales manager workshop on the Thursday. You said, how do I motivate salespeople? You hire them that way.
Yeah, the classic thing is always to my audience is, how many people think you don't need to motivate me, right? And I have this expression, I came running out of the womb motivated. Just right. Clear the deck and let me go make something happen, right? So I just think he's in an enviable position. He's got something that really is clicking on all cylinders. Leave it be, and let's go build something that's equally as strong on the outbound.
Awesome. Well, Jack, I think we're gonna cut it short there. Not so short. We always seem to go over time on these because we're having so much fun getting into people's businesses and sharing, our combined, 74 years of sales experience with them. Thank you again so much for your time. It's always a pleasure. It's always fun to speak to you. I'm sure that all of these business owners got value out of it, but not just them. Hopefully everybody else that was watching and listening. As always, everybody, if you are looking to deep dive any of these issues, if you're looking to get any extra support or you just need a soundboard, please email me at takeaction@immersesales.com. We'll also have all of the links and the things that you can follow us on in the comments. Thank you so much for spending the last almost hour with us, and we will see you again very soon. Thank you, Jack. We appreciate you.
See you in the canyon.
Bye-bye.